Hi everyone, I hope you're all well and staying safe at this difficult time. Sarah and I sat down to record this webinar a couple of weeks ago before it was advised we all work remotely. After much consideration, we've decided to go ahead and release it. Now, more than ever, we need to work together to stay motivated and keep our spirits up. And we hope that our discussion will help sales teams across Europe to feel connected and inspired as we all adjust to working from home. Let's look out for each other in the coming weeks and keep checking in with our colleagues. I hope you enjoy the webinar, and please stick around until the end of the video as Sarah and I will be available live to chat on the Q&A panel and answer any questions you may have. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. Thank you.
Hi there, and welcome to the first of our video series, A Conversation With. Before we get started, I'm going to go over some housekeeping items. Firstly, audio is only available through voice over IP by audio broadcast. There is no dial-in. We'll be sending out a recording within the week after this broadcast. And secondly, if you're experiencing any audio issues, please refresh your browser. For the best viewing experience, we recommend Google Chrome or Firefox. Thirdly, you'll notice that there are some resources in the resource list module to the right of the media player. Please download any of the materials available in that module. And finally, we have team members available on the Q&A panel to answer any questions you may have. So now on to today, and I'm delighted to be speaking to Sarah Goodall, founder and CEO of Tribal Impact, who aim to drive business growth through an aligned approach to employee social media conversations. Sarah is also the co-author of The Social CEO, where she provided invaluable contributions on the many aspects of leading in the social age. I've met Sarah a number of times over the years, and her passion for modern selling and social advocacy has made her the perfect interviewee for this video. Sarah, you're very welcome to LinkedIn.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here, so really appreciate it.
So we know you really well, so for the benefit of people who don't know you really well, tell us a little bit about Sarah and then tell us a little bit about Tribal Impact.
Well, I'm a marketer, so my background's marketing. I've always worked in B2B, I've always worked in the technology sector, so I've kind of grown up in B2B in terms of a marketing side, and I've seen a lot of things change from when I first started doing marketing to this, how we do marketing today. And since setting up my business about 5 years ago now, I've got a foot in both camps now, and I've never had a sales role. I was pretty terrified, actually, to start a business because I've never done a proposal, I've never made a cold call. I was worried, how can I run a business doing that? But actually, I've realised through the conversation we're going to have today around digital selling, modern selling, it's actually all right, and it's quite fun, and it's nice. So I'm a marketer turned sales, but I think I like to say I've got a foot in both camps, so that's my background. So.
Excellent. And from a background perspective, companies you've worked for, the sort of roles you've held in the past?
Yeah, so I've always started in digital roles and across the globe. So I've always had like European roles, things like that. But I started with IBM. My next role was with Hitachi, and most recently I worked for SAP. So global, complex software, hardware, that kind of company. So yeah, it's been good, but in global organisations and global roles. So I've always understood cultural differences, how people buy differently, how you engage people differently. So yeah, it's been a varied career, but I've loved it.
Fantastic.
It's been really good.
So as you say yourself, at the core where you started as a marketer. You now in a sales role. All CEOs are selling, somebody told me once. But also, as a marketer, how important do you think it is for sales and marketing to get much better aligned? And where do you see the quickest and best opportunity for sales leaders and marketing leaders to sit down and say, hey, let's do a better job together at something?
I'm really passionate about this topic because I come from a place where, marketing and sales are a little bit, and it's marketing's job to fill the funnel, it's sales' job to finish it off, and we all have an argument in between about that lead's not good enough and it's not good enough quality. But I have really realised now since starting Tribal actually that the sales conversations that salespeople are having with customers should feed the content that marketing is creating. That content put in the hands of salespeople can be shared. You can win the hearts and minds of buyers earlier. Do you know what I mean? So I think all of this sales and marketing alignment's been going on for ages, right? And we've got to align. Well, actually, I think what we need to do is not align to each other, but we align around the customer. And data is the golden truth for that. And you know, if you've got the right data, if you can connect the dots and you can get a good picture through the insights that you've got, it's incredible. The end-to-end picture that you can get of your customer, it's beneficial for marketing, it's beneficial for sales. So I think honestly, we've got to stop talking about alignment, we've just got to get on with it. So
yeah, it's interesting you said that actually, because one of the things that we recently did was we worked with 1,000 customers globally, and we looked at over 600,000 opportunities that their teams were working on. And we said, well, surely the people that are in the prospect list and in the customer list of this, you know, massive amount of opportunities is representative of the same people that are being targeted by marketing. And we worked with a couple of customers globally to look at what that was, and we were as surprised as they were to find out that there was only 15% overlap. And then in addition to that, we looked at how well we're marketing using their sales team as a channel, because this is, you know, one of the great things that social has brought about is that if you've got a sales team of 500 people or 50 people or 5,000 people, that's a new channel for marketing that previously wasn't there. And you know, really, you know, one of the hot topics for that we're talking to a lot of customers at the moment is about how does what we do support account-based marketing. How often are you talking to your marketing and sales customers about account-based marketing?
Well, I was going to ask you a question about this because just recently we are getting, I'm having conversations with marketing and sales, so we work across the two. I'm starting to see more marketing people coming into social selling sessions, which they should be, right? Because I just think sometimes it's just like, you guys need to understand this. But a couple of times just recently, I've had a few people say to me, that's not our job. We don't use Sales Navigator. We're in marketing. That's a sales thing. So I was going to throw that right back at you. I mean, what's your feeling about that? What's your perspective? Because I've got...
Yeah, I think I have a couple of perspectives on it. Is that first of all, everyone who works for any company is in sales. That you're looking at, you know, from everyone has an impact on the brand. So everybody who's working for the company is in sales, but because of social, everybody is now in sales and marketing. And it's really important that everybody understands the potential that it offers both for sales and marketing, particularly on alignment. What I would say is that we wouldn't necessarily advocate that you give Sales Navigator to everybody in a company. However, we do have the ability to allow people through something called Team Link Extend, that people in marketing can have an extension license, therefore tapping into the network of everybody in the company becomes more possible. And that effectively allows companies to extract relationship capital and value you're already sitting on. And it's incredible when you really start to understand what is the interconnectivity of your employee base. And you know, your company may be selling something to finance directors, and your sales team and your marketing teams may be trying to target people that your finance director went to college with.
Do you know, however, I have got a classic example. I've got so many examples of where that's happened, where we may have done training sessions and the people are sat next to each other. I remember one vividly actually, and someone was sat there and they're like trying to get into a big financial company. And they're looking at the thing and they're like, hold on a minute, according to this, you know this person. I've been trying to talk to this person for 12 months. He goes, oh yeah, we walk our dogs together, you know, on Sundays we go out. And I was just like, this is ridiculous, you know. And what I see the potential of is the connected company. You mentioned earlier, everybody can become a salesperson. They become a referrer, they become a connector, a conversation connector. It's just invaluable, and unless you start taking, I believe, a holistic approach to how you activate a social workforce, you're going to miss that tapped opportunity. And those companies that are measuring this, it's brilliant because they can see that whilst employees, they don't drive thousands of eyeballs to the website, but the ones that they do drive are the highest converting source of traffic than any other source of traffic.
So understand the value of your network, understand the value of the interconnectivity.
Yeah.
And then that's great, people being in the same room and having that conversation. But one of the things we see, particularly here in Europe, that we don't see in other markets, particularly North America, is that we see North American companies are much more heavily invested in sales technology. The average US salesperson has somewhere between 9 to 12 sales productivity applications running on their PC beyond CRM.
Yeah.
So help me understand, what are you seeing? You deal with customers all across Europe. What are you seeing in terms of technology maturity in the ABM space?
I think that's a really good observation, actually, that sales are probably slightly hesitant. You've got more conservative cultures over here. There's a little bit of, this is my network, this is my job, there's a divide. And I think this is where a lot of employees are struggling to understand, the lines are blurring, right? And the person you are when you walk out the door is no really different to the person you are when you're in the office. So there's a struggle, I think, between employees thinking, is this a work thing or is it not? I think the adoption of sales technology is less here, and I feel there's a bit more convincing to do on this side of the pond, if I'm being honest. But when you show examples, when you give evidence, when you use data, and that's the thing I think that's going to drive this, is the data. This is when you can't argue with the numbers, okay? And I saw in your blog, actually, there are some of the things that you've put in there around, the attrition rate, but how you can get views and how that converts into customers. I mean, the data is there. You can't argue with that. And I think the more traditional salespeople can understand that, the more they're going to start getting convinced about trying new sales technologies and just having a go. Sorry, just one thing to add on that. Embedding behaviour change is the tricky bit, right? And I think this is where, they'll walk in, they'll do a workshop, they're all excited, and then in a month's time, they'll just come and think, okay, they'll start using it as the new database, and then just hit the phones again and revert back to old ways of doing things. So I was going to ask you, what do you think are the hindrances that are stopping people from adopting sales tech?
Well, I think there's two things. First, what we see is that there's not necessarily a budget that exists. And a lot of the time, what we see with customers who are starting a journey with LinkedIn sales technology is, well, where do I pay for this?
Yeah,
because
I agree.
IT haven't budgeted for it. And a lot of the time what we find is that customers start with marketing. So discretionary marketing funding, and then at a further point for the next budgeting cycle, they scale out. The key thing for me is, and what we often talk to our customers about, is that when you invest in LinkedIn sales technology or anybody's sales technology, it's not magic dust. You don't buy bags of it and sprinkle it on the heads of your salespeople and then they just magically transform. If it was like that, we'd probably charge a lot more for that technology. And if it was available, we'd all certainly want to invest in it. So what's really important is that it's not an individual salesperson behavior change, it's an organizational behavior change.
Yeah.
And if you go and a company hires you and your team and you do an amazing job on all of the individual contributors in the company, but the managers just continue to do what they were doing.
Yeah.
And the leadership continue to do what they're doing. And they're not having conversations which are, well, help me understand, how many people do we know at this company?
Yeah.
Or who are the people that we don't know and what's the best path for us to get to them?
Yeah.
How many people are aligned to this specific opportunity? Because startlingly, what we know from Gartner CEB is that there's up to 7 people involved in a B2B sale. We recently did some work with 2 leading global technology companies. Because they're selling complex data center solutions, they have somewhere between 12 to 14 people in their buying committee. However, scarily, when we look into their CRM and say, well, how many people are against your top opportunities, we're typically seeing 1 to 2 to 3. Wow. And rarely do we see a majority being everybody. So this is about an organizational change, not just an individual contributor change.
Yeah.
So we like to say, hey, you start at the top and work down, and you start at the bottom and you work up. And clearly that seems to be your experience as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the point you make about embedding behaviour change, it has to start with the conversations that sales leaders are having with their teams. Okay, so we always say it's a change of language. We look at the digital indicators. You know, your typical bank criteria. I was talking to a customer about this the other day. What's the digital equivalent of that, right? We used to always say we won't pass a qualified lead over until it's got a budget, until we know there's a project. But actually, if you look at the digital indicators now, the equivalents, how many profile views have you got? How many conversations have you had? How many conversions have you seen? How much content have you published? How many, and these are the indicators, I think. If sales leaders integrated that into their conversations with their sales teams, it would change the conversation a little bit, and it would shift the behaviour. And to your point about this organisational change, I think you're absolutely right. This is much bigger than sales. It's much bigger than marketing. It's actually the connected company, and how content feeds connections, feeds conversions, feeds influence. Everything is connected, and unless you take a holistic view, which is what that Social CEO book's about, you need to take a holistic view to this social activation. So,
interestingly, one of the things that we sometimes see people in decision making who are like me in their 50s plus, is that when they typically grew up as salespeople, if you're talking to a senior sales director, a VP of sales, when they were salespeople 20 and 30 years ago, the world was a different place. And sometimes, social can be seen as, well, look, I don't really want my people sitting at their desk. Is that often a perception that you see with your customers, that it's not augmenting your existing actions, it's social versus traditional?
I don't know about my customers. My dad thinks I play on social all day. That's all he thinks I do. He thinks I'm on Facebook all the time. But yeah, I think there is a perception. It's like, once you let your team loose, I'm not just having them play on social media all day. That's not, and this is where I think you've got to get the indicators right, and you've got to educate leaders of the company as well as across the organisation, not just one audience against the other. And I think it is a mental shift. I think people do feel it's like, I can't do this on top of what I've already got to do. And it's like, well, don't, consider dropping one thing and starting a new thing, and just see what happens, and, see these little indicators change. And then they're like, oh, that's quite good. And they'll start to see things happen over time. And we always say, look, you're not going to start doing this today, and then next week you're going to suddenly get a multi-million-pound deal. It's not going to work like that. Relationships don't work like that. And it's the same on social. But what you will start seeing is people contacting you that didn't know you worked for that company because you just moved there. And these are the indicators that tell you you're doing the right thing. And I think as long as people get comfortable with that, they start getting comfortable with change. And I think this is too much to expect people to just say, yeah, okay, I've suddenly converted. You can't do that. And I think the hardest part actually is convincing these VPs and sales directors of this is a new modern way of talking to buyers and winning the hearts and minds of them quite often before there's a buyer need even in their head. And if you do that, then, when there is a buyer need, they'll come, and they'll come quick, and they'll come fast, and you've got to be ready for that. But that's the traditional forecasting thing, is it kind of blows that out of the water a little bit, because it's all about nurturing customers that aren't yet ready to buy, and that can be tricky when you do traditional measurements. So
yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that's fascinated me, I'm at LinkedIn just over 3.5 years, and one of the common myths, and you hear people talking about this, is that, hey, we're a market leader in our space, our team know everybody, nothing moves nothing moves in one of my team's territories that they don't know about. And anyway, because we're a market leader, nobody would buy category X without approaching us. And I'm always fascinated when we unveil connectivity data that we've got some insights into. Tell us your market, tell us the industries you're interested in, tell us the roles your team normally sell to, and then what we're able to do is produce a connectivity matrix. And even though everybody knows everybody, the highest that I've seen natively before doing a digital program is somewhere in the 6 to 7 to 8% range.
Wow.
And the initial reaction is, that can't possibly be true. And it's very much a shift in understanding, because we often say to sales leaders, hey, we're going to share this data with you, but it's not a criticism of your team. This doesn't mean your team haven't been doing what they should be doing, they're not working hard. This is a reflection of there are many more decision makers, organizations are more matrixed, and it's becoming more complex to be a B2B salesperson. So is that a challenge that you see resonating with some of your customers?
Yeah, definitely. I hear it all the time, especially in the traditional businesses, that are sort of maybe manufacturing, that come from a place of doing things they've come from a place of history, right, and heritage, and this new modern way of doing things is a little bit of a hard thing to swallow. But I want to throw something back at you actually, which is about the future buyer, right? Because we know all our buyers, we know everyone, and they're not on LinkedIn, they're just not that social type, and it's like, okay, what about the new audience? Because I always sort of throw this back and say, well, what about your future buyer? The next person that moves into that role might be a little bit more digitally savvy. So what's your perspective on the millennial or whatever?
Well, millennials is interesting because the oldest millennial is now 38.
Wow.
And at the end of this year, millennials will make up 50% of the professionals in a workplace. So the millennials are just professionals like everybody else now. Okay. And my perspective is twofold. First of all, that the modern buyer, if somebody is trying to sell to them and they don't know who they are, guess what? They're also using LinkedIn. Now, the first thing they may do is look you up on LinkedIn. Who is this Liam Halpin guy that's trying to communicate with me? And what is it that when they go to my LinkedIn profile, I'm telling them? Now, do I have a list of jargonized job description? This is what I do. I'm responsible for maximizing and leveraging, or is there a description of what you do and your role? And are there examples of where you've spoken or where you've delivered value for other customers? And then lo and behold, they can also see who they may know that knows you. So your digital presence is super important.
And it's not, I always think it's not enough to say what you've done, where you've been, you've got to show you are at the top of your game if you want to win trust with your future buyer, right? It's not enough to say I've done this, I did that, and a CV-led approach. I think for anybody, whether you're in a sales role or not, it's about a living identity of who you are, what you stand for, what you're passionate about, and that comes across by showing that you are reading, that you are learning, that you are constantly improving, and that if that gets communicated, that's a great presence. And I think this is just something that the modern buyer, 38, I can almost classify myself into. I think so.
I just missed it.
But do you know what? They're in positions of buying now, right? So at 38, you're in a role where you've got a budget probably. So your future buyer is there. So
a lot of my senior managers have not quite hit 38 yet. So so we need to stop talking about millennials as the workers coming into the workplace. They're definitely not. The other side of the coin we also see is that change is hard. And so in terms of embedding you've spoken about traditional businesses. So how long do you believe is realistic that somebody should expect that with a medium level of transformation effort? How long does that take? Because is it a 3-month thing? It's magic and it's done, or is it longer than that?
I think in an individual level, you'll start to see. I always say it's like building a pipeline of relationships. So we're very much into building pipeline of revenue, but actually if you think about building a pipeline of relationships, you start to turn a corner between sort of 5 and 6 months as an individual if you keep at it. Quite often you'll hit a dip at 2 months where you just think, well, this is not working, is it? And then, that's the moment where really leaders need to sort of get onto that and push them. From an organisational point of view, I started doing this with SAP years ago, and they're still going through this transformational change. And this is a culture change. This is not going to go overnight. If you're looking about socially activating your entire business to become part of the social conversation and increase the reach, for me, this is going to take a while. So don't expect instant change, but look for the little indicators and get the measurements in place that allow you to to fine tune what you're doing and recognize those little wins. And the little wins are not going to be, I mean, I always remember the fax machine and doing direct faxing.
I sold fax machines.
Did you? Standing over the fax machine, faxing people in Europe, and it's just like, waiting for the orders to come flying in. That is not going to happen, okay? So people need to just get over that. It's not going to happen. But when you build a pipeline of relationships, you can keep investing in this. As a business, you will start to attract. And this is what I love about this topic, because you start to attract best fit customers, right? You don't have to qualify in, qualify out, because actually the ones that land with you have already done their research, right? They want to work with you. They like you. They've built a picture of you as a business and as an individual. It just makes the process a lot easier and maybe slightly less predictable, but actually a lot more pleasant. So I think, I think it's quite exciting actually, and technology is the way to do this. So
it's interesting actually, because I had a conversation recently with a senior business leader who asked me a question. In my opinion, were salespeople, B2B salespeople today, just not as good at closing business as salespeople were 20 and 30 years ago? And actually, I hadn't specifically thought about closing as a conversation. And as we spoke about it, I thought, well, hang on a sec. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, you were normally dealing with the decision maker.
Yep.
And that meant that you could go and sit in front of the decision maker and close a deal. Your classic up the objection ladder and come to a consensus and shake hands and close a deal. And I just thought about that. Well, actually, that's not the way it works anymore, because there's 6 to 7 to up to 14 people involved in a decision. It means that the customer closes in a room with the key influencers and decision makers.
Yeah.
You're not in the room.
Exactly.
So part of that brand and reputation and you having to cover off all of those people, your ability to do that determines how well you're closing, because you're not in the room anymore.
That's right.
And you don't have the power to be there.
You don't.
And it's interesting when I saw a penny drop with that business leader, because his perception was, my team are just not good at closing business the way I used to be.
Wow.
Did you often see those penny drop pieces?
Yeah, where they suddenly realise it's like, crikey, we don't own that relationship anymore. It's those decisions are happening without us in the room, without us educating. And I tell you another thing, this has massively changed the procurement process, the tender process. Right? Because the tender process used to be 20 years ago when I was at IBM, let's invite you in the room, you educate us, see you later, we'll invite the next one in. It doesn't happen like that now. And the procurement process, in my experience, has changed, because now it's more about, okay, we'll just do the tick box exercise and potentially get you through. And we have to, and one of my customers said, you just don't want to be column fodder, right? Because that's where it's at. Unless you're winning those hearts and minds and the trust of your future buyer, and not just the decision maker, but the bigger circle around them, you're just going to be column fodder, and you're just dealing on price, not value. And a lot of this is about getting in the head of the buyer very often before there's a buyer need. And it's all about relationship building and just pulling back a little bit, and being less sort of aggressive and interruptive, and being more helpful and value added. And I think that changes the way people perceive you, and it builds trust. And that's the big thing for me. It's all about trust, and not just with one person. You mentioned something earlier which I thought was brilliant. If you're trying to reach HR audiences with a piece of software or cloud software, you as a salesperson are trying to enter that conversation. What about the HR director in your company that probably has a better relationship with those people than anybody else? You need to activate your company to have those conversations, because they're more trusted, they're more credible, they're more authentic. Why would you not do that? So, yeah. Oh, I love this topic. I could talk forever on it.
So trust, huge topic. Technology you mentioned as well. Talk to me about where you see an investment in technology, but not just an investment in technology, an enablement. There's, as I often say to people, there's no point going out and buying a giant JCB digger. You also need to know and have somebody who knows how to use it and operate it and get you value from it. So, so talk about the technology piece.
For me, the technology gives you the data, right? And without the data, you don't know whether you're doing well or not well. So for me, the technology platform is a way to scale efficiently, productively, remotely. You know, people still getting in cars, driving across states in America. Some of our customers do that. And you just think, why are you doing that? You know, I mean, actually, you could pre-qualify and get that meeting to a very high qualified state by using digital modern techniques. So I think technology is going to be a huge productivity driver, efficiency, and it will give you the data off the back of it. But your point, that you can't just buy it and then expect them to know how to use it. And that's the biggest issue, I think, is, and it's the same, it's always been the same, right? For years, you get, we've got a new CRM system, and then it's only as good as the data you put in it, which is not great. So, and then people blame the system. It's not the system, it's the enablement. And, you know, helping your teams to truly understand and get a good feel for it and use it, break it, you know, see what the limitations are of it, is absolutely key if you want to embed behaviour change, in my opinion. So,
quick question for you on you're stuck in the lift for 5 minutes, or you have the opportunity in the elevator/lift for 5 minutes with the CEO of a company that's thinking about this. What's the top 3 pieces of advice you'd give in that couple of minutes?
Wow, that's a good question. I would suggest about socially activating the entire workforce, because relationships are key. Connected company is key. Everybody has the power to influence a customer, whether they're content creators, whether they're sharers, whether they're conversation starters, which is probably what the new sales role is about. And I think if you take this, so probably, you know, this is not just about sales. It's probably one of the first pieces of advice I would give. I would say you need the technology to back this up, because unless you can prove that this is working, where's your investment going, right? And technology will give you the data, it'll give you the efficiency to do it. And I think probably my third piece of advice is the training and enablement, because you can't expect your organisation to change itself unless employees, leaders, functions understand how each one connects with each other and the value they bring to this socially connected company. You're never going to do it. And what I see happening at the minute is there's a lot of isolated projects happening in companies. There's not a lot of people that actually sit above all of that. A couple of our customers do that, but there's not a lot of roles that sit. There is no role for this, right? And you need to think holistically, right? Stop thinking in silos, think holistically, and that would be my third piece of advice, I think. There's probably more bits of advice than that, but no, it's brilliant.
Excellent. And then just on the terminology, because this is sometimes, you know, we already spoke about your dad thinks you spend your life on Facebook and wonders how you make a living from from that. Are we doing ourselves a disservice with social selling, modern selling, digital selling? Because, you know, digital selling, some people think is e-commerce. Social selling, people mistake for, well, I'm just going to have my salespeople sitting at the desk liking and sharing something all day. What's your feeling on the terminology we use in our industry?
Yeah, I know. I think it's an interesting one. I've asked my customers this. It's like digital selling, modern selling, social selling. What's the difference? And I've got a lot of feedback. I'm going to turn it into a blog, actually. But yes, I think we're confusing it, right, a little bit. I think we're all sort of jumping on different phrases. For me, it's about social activation, right? And I've heard a few of my customers using this phrase, and it's about maybe socially, digitally activating your entire company. Because otherwise, is it just social? No, because actually, if you use video within the sales process, it's amazing, right? You can use it at all stages of the sales process. If you use, video conferencing, for example, it's all part of it. So is social selling restrictive? Probably. I think actually when it comes down to it, it's about using the language your customers are using. They are modern buyers, right? And this is how it's working. So modern selling, modern business, connected companies, I think this is probably where it's going. So But I watch this space because it changes every year.
Yeah, I've as we've been talking, I've thought of another one.
Oh,
It's,
go on then. No, tell me off the camera.
Social augmentation.
Yeah.
Which fits in, actually. I wrote a blog about 2 years ago, and I'm not a soccer fan, or football as we call it in this part of the world. But if you think about how people used to put football teams together, you went out and you found raw talent. You gave that raw talent structure and discipline. You put them on a field of play against somebody doing the same, and whoever won. Yeah. Whereas at some point somebody said, hey, what about this sports psychology stuff? Right. So the people then leaned in and augmented using the psychology, then sports nutrition, and now all the football players have a little telemetry unit in the back of their jerseys, so they know how far they've run. And all that makes such a difference now that if you went and took a football team from the 1960s, like one of the World Cup winning teams, and put them against a pretty average team from a second or third or fourth division here in the UK, the World Cup winning team would not beat that team. No. Because they've been augmented. Now, you can't make everybody a footballer. You still need raw talent, you still need structure, you still need discipline. So a lot of the time I talk to business leaders about it's not about stopping the core of sales. People buy from people. Sales is still a contact sport. You still need to call people, you still need to meet people, but this augments your ability to do that.
Absolutely. It doesn't replace it. And I think a lot of people think, well, okay, let's all go over here then. And it doesn't replace it. It absolutely augments it. And, you can probably get a bit efficient with your time. It's about smart selling, potentially. It's about doing smart business in a smart way, in an efficient way, and in a productive way. So I would say exactly the same thing. It's not about replacing or, moving your goalposts, to your analogy. It's just about augmenting it and making it a bit easier for everybody, for the customer, ultimately, because they're the most important, but also for your team. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. Sarah, thanks a million for coming into LinkedIn and having a discussion with us today.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating having you here. Hope to have you back again at some point.
Yeah,
thanks
Liam. Cheers. Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. I'd like to take a moment to thank Sarah again for joining me. It's been fascinating to get your different perspectives and insights, and a huge thank you to everybody who has tuned in. We really value your time, and we hope we've delivered a worthwhile return on it. You can let us know what you thought about today's discussion by completing a short survey that will pop up at your console at the broadcast. Just to remind you, all those of you who joined today's broadcast will receive an email with a link to the recording in the next few days. Please do share the materials with your colleagues or rewatch and review anytime you like. If you'd like more information on Sales Navigator or learn more about our recent product updates, you can find some quick links in the resource list panel to the right of the media player. And finally, another big thank you to Sarah from Tribal Impact for joining us, and goodbye for now.
Hey everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Sarah and I are now appropriately socially distanced, with me here in Ireland and Sarah's in the UK. Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you, Liam. Yes, not too bad. So I'm enjoying the sun, I'm healthy, and I've got 3 kids to try and deal with. So life is a bit manic, but it's good, so it's good.
Fantastic, and it's only 5 weeks ago since we recorded the webinar in the UK. It seems like a lifetime ago. So great to talk to you again. And to everybody on the live stream, we appreciate your time and the many questions we've had during the stream. We can't answer them all right now, so what we've done is we've chosen a selection that reflects some of the common themes. And no surprise, the changes that we've had in our businesses in the last couple of weeks are prominent. So first question is, how can you continue to track employee performance of teams, and any tips for ensuring productivity remains high? The first thing I'd say here is that it's important that we acknowledge that this isn't about the time you spend at a desk now, but importantly, what output and what productivity. So moving away from the traditional thinking about, hey, you need to spend 8 hours at your desk. We also need to acknowledge for our teams that this is an extraordinary time. Right? We're living in unprecedented time, and then for anyone involved in sales, you've never experienced what we're experiencing right now. So a lot of us are trying to learn. We're finding new ways of working, new ways of staying connected, and new ways of navigating the sales process itself. And sales leaders are learning these things alongside their teams. We're learning at the same time in a lot of cases. So here's some tips over the last 6 or 7 weeks that certainly I've come up with, is that it's important that you continue to schedule regular manager and sales rep one-to-one check-ins. It's important that you do that. Stay connected via virtual team chats, and that's not just about having formal connections, but also how do you continue to connect with the informality. So for example, today I will actually have my lunch at my desk after this call, and I'll be open on a video. And my team will just drop in and we'll have a chat about what do we do at the weekend, etc. The other thing then is important to have separate what we call office hours, so drop-in clinics effectively, where people can ask and present questions and where you can give feedback. And then the things that we've done at LinkedIn is we've unblocked a range of free courses. It'll be shared in the resource center here on helping teams selling in these difficult times. So I think it's about 16 LinkedIn learning content pieces available for everyone to use, and it's specifically around the whole areas of empathy, asking better questions, digital body language. They're in the resource widget on the On24 platform. So Sarah, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so so certainly at Tribal, we've always operated as a virtual business. So culturally, it's had less of an impact for us. So we've not really had to adapt, but we have learned over the last 5 years the kind of things that work well. And we use, whether you use Slack or Teams or some kind of internal chat, we use that all the time. It saves booking phone calls. You can just literally get instant answers. I have to say, we love an animated GIF. Talk about a picture says 1,000 words. We use that a lot. We use video a lot, actually. So, rather than booking a call to show someone, just pre-record a video, get it done, send it over, job done. So there is a new way of being productive in a remote team. But to the point of tracking employee performance, I'm not ever sure now is the time to track employee performance. This now more than ever, it's all about trust. We're all juggling kids, homeschooling, constant requests for food, pets, just trying to get through the days at the minute. So I think at the minute, trust is the most important thing, and just focus, like you say, on supporting your team to learn how to adapt, make yourself accessible, and just be there when people need to, whether it's through video, chat, calls. Just be a bit more flexible and just let that happen. And like you say, we're all learning this as we go, so it's unprecedented time. So we're all trying to adapt. So just I'll tell you what, I've met more of my customers' pets over the last few weeks. Dogs coming into calls, children. It's just so lovely. It's all quite human again, So actually it makes it a bit more informal.
Great. And yes, I've seen a lot of people's pets in the last couple of weeks as well. Yeah. Next one is how can I ensure I'm being supportive to my team in these difficult times where pipeline has plummeted? Just on the pipeline plummeting, what we're seeing is that for some companies, this is a pause on their business or in some cases a dead stop. But we also need to be careful that we don't make assumptions. So for example, we have a customer who they're in the event space. So you can imagine that right now, if you're in the events industry, your business has come to a stop. But that's not the case because their sales teams are currently and were selling their 2021, 22, and 23 events. So right now, they're continuing to support their team. So what I would say is it's important that leaders lead their teams around not making assumptions. And then the most important thing is that a leader keeps calm. If you as a leader are not displaying calm and poise at this time, the trickle-down effect that has and the shadow you cast on your team may make them even more apprehensive than they need to be. So it's like taking steps to mitigate distractions, remain steady, conveying a big picture mentality. Also, managing with compassion has rarely been more important than now, and it starts with even small things around checking with people, how are they, right? So a lot of the times we need to we need to look at what's happening with the individual before we look at what's happening with the business. So be proactive and then make sure you're checking in with your teams. Then sales teams run on targets, but these are the times when you need your teams to give them permission to put those targets to one side in some cases, focus on relationships. And even if your bestseller can't generate demand from their buyers right now, in these circumstances, it's important. Focus on value, focus on buyer relationships, and continue to invest in nurturing those relationships, because your customers that you stand by today are the customers that are going to be your customers 10 years from now. Sarah, a perspective on that?
Yeah, I think your last point there actually is quite key. One thing we talk about when we talk about modern selling, it's less about you do this, you get that. It's less about the cause and effect. And I think now more than ever, you need to invest in helping your customers. That's what modern selling is about. But now it's more than that. So in terms of supporting your team in difficult times, I would say just accept that this is it's about building long-term relationships. And we always think about, yes, you have to build a pipeline of revenue. That's a given. But actually, think about building a pipeline of relationships. And now is a good time to help your team learn new techniques, learn about investing in the longer-term picture. And in many ways, it's forcing companies' hands to do that now, because at this point, everybody's going through different things. And like you said, a lot of buyers are not in the mindset to buy, okay? We've got other priorities going on at the minute. So focus on helping your buyer in whatever way you can. That will earn you trust. And that is ultimately what this is about. So, yeah, good.
Great. The next question is actually linked to that. Can you share any tips for maintaining relationships with your customers? Firstly, what I would say there is, let customers dictate the pace. And that's about encouraging your reps to check in with their contacts at a genuine goodwill. So instead of launching into a pitch, it's genuinely, how are you doing? Any way I can be helpful? Sharing your experience of how things are going with you. This is people buy from people, and this is a time when people need to be people. And then, make an assessment based on how to proceed based on what you're hearing. Because if your customer's going through a particularly difficult personal circumstances or juggling, as we spoke about earlier, not really a good time to have a conversation about how you can add value. So important, people buy from people, be a person first, and then do more listening than talking. We've always said that in sales, but this is a time when you need to really listen to what your customer is trying to figure out, and then leaning in where you can genuinely solve their problems. Sarah, tips and tricks right now for maintaining relationships with your customers?
I think you've pretty much hit the nail on the head there, really. I mean, I've been the recipient of those calls where people are just checking in with me, right? They don't want anything. They just want to see, how are you doing, Sarah? Are you okay? And it feels good. And they may leave a message. I might not reply, but actually it was just a nice thought. So I think, send a text, send an email, send a message on LinkedIn. It's a good opportunity to open the conversation via LinkedIn. And it's just a thought, really. Just check in with people and be human, I think is, to your point, Liam, the most important thing.
And then, Sarah, the final question we have time for, you're actually much better as an entrepreneur and having founded your own business several years ago to answer this question. We've got a question here, which is, what advice can you give small businesses who don't have the resources that big corporations have?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I would probably classify myself as a small business. I'm not a big global corporation. I've worked in many, but I'm now genuinely a small business. I would say, actually, in a time of crisis, there is an opportunity to, say, pivot a little bit. Listen, genuinely listen to your conversation customers, to your point on the previous question, Liam, and see where they genuinely need help. And you're small enough to be agile and to move and to to innovate, right? And actually all companies can do this now. And I'm seeing so many amazing stories at the moment in the press about, my favorite chocolate company, Cadbury, are switching their manufacturing lines to make visors, screens for people to wear in hospitals. And you see automotive companies switching their manufacturing lines to make ventilators. I mean, this is a time when any corporation, big or small, if you listen, if you look, if you learn, you can switch, you can be agile, you can innovate. And this more than anything will teach us, right? You have an opportunity to pivot and to grow your business maybe in a direction that you hadn't thought about. So think big, don't think in the moment that you're in. It's like this, this is a situation and I can't get out of it. Take a time to think about, okay, how can I shift? How can I change? What are my customers asking me? And I think if you do that, you'll be quite surprised about what you can innovate. So, and I know you've got an example, right, Liam? I think you had one that you saw.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I live in Ireland, and there's actually a company that's gotten a lot of press, and I've seen a lot of activity on LinkedIn.com about this. There's a company called the Flying Elephant. Great name. And what their traditional business has been, they're an events company. So they're the sort of company that would put a stand together, signage, so typically moving in and doing that sort of stuff to support corporations. They've pivoted their business because of this crisis and using their tooling and the equipment that they have for making event stands. They've actually put together a flat pack desk that can be assembled in, I think it's 15 minutes. And based on what I'm seeing is that their business is thriving on that. I know a lot of my colleagues who didn't have desks at home have invested in their desk. And if you'd spoken to that company 7 or 8 weeks ago, that wouldn't have been something that was on their radar. But as you say, they have the agility as a smaller business to be able to pivot their business very, very quickly, and wish them the best of luck. Certainly they're adding a lot of value to people who now need to work from home. On the technology side as well, this is also a great time for smaller businesses to avail of technology. If you think about, 20 years ago, it was out of the reach of most small businesses to have video conferencing, whereas now, whether it's Microsoft Teams or whether it's Zoom or whether it's BlueJeans or several other platforms that are out there, this is a great time to be able to enable your team with cloud-based technologies to be able to run your business remotely. So thanks everyone for your questions. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Sarah, thanks a million for joining us again, and look forward to seeing you face to face at some point in the future. Thanks to everybody who joined the stream. Stay safe, stay well, and bye for now.